Ian, we got a Patreon, don't we?
We do patreon.com/CU podcast. You go, you exchange money, you get the full video podcast writings. I will do one this week, I promise. Hangouts, probably about a week and a half until our next hangout. You get the bonus podcast segments and you get to vote in user polls, just like this one.
Well, this is a fun poll. This was going to be a close one. In second place are sealed game collectors being mistreated, 40%. In first place, free space, happy new year, 60%. But guess what? This is why democracy can be a mob. We're going with our sealed game collectors being mistreated. An article that was written now months ago, which actually kind of dovetails off the last topic, kind of worked out. So the link's down there below, Ian, for future topics. So this comes from Input Mag. This was an article under the capitalism, section from Chris Stokel-Walker. The retro video game market is bonkers. Some suspect foul play. What's behind the massive surge in prices that has upset small-time collectors? Already you're couching that it's small-time collectors. What, because we don't have the money? Would I be considered a small-time collector, Ian, just because I'm not into graded games? I don't think so. But but I'll get on the author later for that. He probably meant well. It starts with talking about Charles Reed, always liked games, but a small collector, not into the graded stuff. And they're saying it's gotten out of control. The market's changing. This article brings up the July, now infamous Mario 64 going for 1.5 million.
That was July already. Jeez,
yeah, that was half a year ago, Ian.
Fuck.
If you have this article open, they spoke to Carl Jobst. So this video came out after the first video and before the second one that came out in December of September. So this article was probably written then, I want to say late September, early October was probably written. Jobst said it's all a song and dance. He told Input it's all completely fake. The more I looked at it, the more I realized, yeah, there's something going on here.
Right.
Heritage and WADA have denied all the allegations. Separately, journalist Seth Abramson has made similar allegations of collusion between the two. And maybe a couple of dumb podcasters have for years as well.
Maybe.
Jobst tells Input he's making a follow-up video, blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right. So Valerie McLeckley of Heritage Auctions responded. I've met Valerie, very, very nice person, but I disagree with her here on a couple of fronts here. The implication is that ordinary gamers are being cut out of their hobby because of the inflated prices. Far from it, says those involved. That's sort of the normal progression of any collectible market, says Valerie McLeckley of Heritage Auctions, which runs weekly Tuesday night video game auctions, blah, 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 blah. As there is a boom in interest, there are certain pieces that people get priced out on. So I think what Carl would disagree with is what we call the normal progression. And I think any sane person watching this market, even people that are bullish, would say this is not a normal progression. It was too quick to be a normal progression. It didn't happen in decades. It happened in a matter of, say, 18 months, where it just spun out of control. And I think that's what we get on when we talk about this stuff, is that you had a collective make this happen. There was no natural rise in prices. When you track comic books, Star Wars figures, baseball cards, those progressions you saw happen slowly over time, over the decades. With these graded games, even before the graded games, because graded games have been around, they were around before WADA and before Heritage Auctions. They were worth more, but not like this. So if you wanted to track it from then, you could have said, okay, 2000, whatever the first VGA game was, like 2008 or 9, for the first 10 years, yeah, they probably went up a little bit, but not like through to the moon, as they said there.
Right.
Sure, we have seen in the media the tremendous results that have been achieved on the free market, but that's because they are so tremendous, she adds. If a gamer wanted to pick up a loose cartridge of a game to collect, they still could. That's what the article says. And this is where I get offended by this stuff. By the way, they denied Carl Jobst's allegations. They're completely unsupported. Of course, they don't say how they're unsupported. And this is where I take issue with Valerie's at this point. Across other collectible hobbies, it's not uncommon for there to be sour grapes when third-party authentication begins to become popular. Sour grapes. So when you mention that, I think what you're doing is you're discounting any valid criticism of what's been happening. or any concerns you may have by saying, well, it's just people that don't like what's happening for the sake of it, and that's it. And
I think there is some of that, but I don't think that's all of it. And I think it's disingenuous to imply that it's all of it.
And this is why we've always talked about, sealed games has always been a point of contention.
Yes.
Forever. I argue with people about it, on Nintendo Age, about some of these people that were involved with some of these sales now eventually. And it was a fundamental disagreement about what game collecting is. It wasn't necessarily sour grapes. And people have had issues with sealed collecting way before the prices shot up to these insane amounts that something fishy is going on. So you want to call it sour grapes. Yeah, but this happened before. It had nothing to do with the pricing on these games. It had to do with the thought and intention behind it. So my argument always was that this wasn't true game collecting, because if you wanted to collect games, you would be satisfied with any complete in-box copy or any cartridge. And at that point, what happened is you are valuing the cellophane versus the actual game itself at that point. Like, it takes over at some point. That's what drives you. The actual game doesn't matter. The game itself matters a lot less than the condition. Condition becomes first and foremost the reason you are collecting. That was always my argument when it came to it. You're collecting condition. You're not collecting games anymore.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's very true.
Then they brought up our pal Eric Nyerman, who was in a couple of these articles. Carl Jobs featured him. He is the dentist. They always got to bring up the dentist in Florida. And when this individual comments on our videos covering this, I think it's him. He has to put Eric Nyerman DDS as his name. Like,
it's very strange. I just don't get that.
Like, anyone gives a shit that you're in people's mouths all day. Like, we don't even know that when you're commenting, but whatever, Eric. So this article says he spent the last several years buying some of the, not several years, like 2.5, not several years. It wasn't buying games before WADA and Heritage Auctions were doing this. He spent the last several years buying some of the world's rarest games for millions of dollars. No. His conglomerate LLC has been buying these games.
Yeah.
Which is why he's not, again, a real collector. A real collector doesn't go to his rich friends and neighbors, hey, I need money for a startup to buy games. Ian, have you ever asked your friends for money to buy a bunch of games at one time? I don't think I've done that.
Yeah.
I don't think you talk to game collectors. I don't think that's a thing they've done,
I mean, he says, I've been very, very transparent about it. I tell people It's financially driven, and it's also collector driven. I'm a true collector at heart. I really am. Anyone who says shit like that is already trying too hard to convince other people. Just admit you're in this for the money and the numbers, and you're not in it for the games.
I'm a true collector, even though I only started doing this when I thought I could realize profitable gain. I'm a collector. Even though I wasn't buying these games 10 years ago for pennies on the dollar versus now, that's how much I love this stuff. That's the argument I always come back to. You really love this stuff. Why didn't you buy it even 5 years ago when you could have got the stuff for 1% of the value? You could have got all the sealed Mario 64s to your heart's content for like $150, $200, $300. You could have bought them all if you loved them that much. It's ridiculous. I'm a true collector at heart, I really am, but this has become its own animal as the stakes get higher and higher and people put money into the hobby. It's not a hobby. It's a collectibles market, I would say. That's what it is. And this is where I'm going to draw the title of the clickbaity title from. Nyerman reckons a lot of the criticism of big value collectors is driven by desire to be in their place. A lot of people are very judgmental just based on envy and jealousy. And they force themselves to be very close-minded to people who are doing things differently, how they do it. Envy and jealousy of the dentist and his cohorts there. Is it envy and jealousy because of the money being made, or of the? It's not of the stuff being collected. Because obviously, people like me and you could have bought the sealed games anytime we want to. I still can buy sealed games. I have the cash to buy some sealed games. I could. I just don't agree with it. That's obviously why I don't. And this is what you're going to love, Ian. Nyerman draws a link between the way he and others have been treated and cancel culture. That's how I feel like I've been treated in some corners of the market. If you don't collect how I collect, you shouldn't be collecting at all. Okay. Cancel culture. So now anytime you have criticism of someone at all and we'll just say weird lying ways of saying they're a collector and starting LLCs to try to put money in your pocket, in the pockets of your friends. Now it's all cancel culture. Do you think that's true, Ian?
No, I mean, I don't really believe in cancel culture in general. You look around and not many people who have whined about being canceled have actually been canceled by anything.
Eric, have you been canceled at all? Are people getting less crowns and caps at your business now? Less dental work because some collectors are saying we disagree with your scummy ways. Are you really being canceled, buddy? I don't think you're being canceled, buddy. You probably still have your house, that you've made off of people getting dental implants. I think you're doing fine. I think you're doing okay. It's a very traumatic change to change a hobby into a market. This is how you know Eric's not a collector. There's always been a video game market. Always. Right. Even 20 years ago, there's been a market for this stuff. There's always been the hard to find games. There's always been the games that are worth more. Stadium events was always hard to find and people wanted it. It was worth more. The NWC carts were always worth more, even 20 years ago. They weren't always worth what they're worth now, but they were always worth the premium. There were always the games at the premium, Ian. You know that.
Yes.
We know that. It's not a traumatic change. The only change is the motivation behind it. Before, it was drawn from a place of wanting to collect games either because they were scarce or because they had some historical notoriety, like the NWC carts or a Mr. Boston on Vectrex is always a weird one that I wish I owned. That's where we drew, the pricing of this stuff came from naturally.
Yeah.
There's been retro game conventions for at least 11 years now. The first one was either Portland or Seattle, but I think Portland was the first one. There's always been a market for this stuff. This is a very I wish the author of this article pushed back on that, because that's not what the issue is. There's always been a market for this stuff. What a stupid, dumb statement to say. I spent 4 figures on a gold NWC card. There's never a market before this. Are you fucking crazy?
Sure.
It's insane. 4 figures. What is it for? I'm sorry. 5 figures. 5 figures. I spent 4 figures on one, 5 figures on the other.
Pat math.
Yeah. There's no market though, Ian. There's no market. As one of the aggrieved, Reed aims, this is the collector, aims his ire less at the collectors and more at the cash they're flashing. I don't care about the cash they're flashing. I don't really care about that. Again, it's the intent and motivation behind it. If these were people that truly cared about this stuff and didn't just look to flip it to the next idiot behind them and leave them holding the bag, I would have less issue with it. If people honestly, and like Ian, we've met a couple people that honestly like sealed game collecting, and they've been around. But this new wave are not even them. The people I disagree with, they're not that at all. Jobs stresses that he's not saying that video games shouldn't be worth millions and collectors are only hurt by this if the price of games goes up. He adds, what I was saying is that I don't believe the current spike in video games was organic. And I believe the ethics involved were poor. Therefore, I don't believe the current market is real, which is like 99% of people are agreeing with at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree that it just doesn't seem like it was an organic spike.
Finally, Valerie McLeckley said, video games have tremendous potential. I'm guessing to go up more in price. At the end of the day, video games are the most consumed format of media in existence. We celebrate the release of AAA titles to a degree that's even more intense than blockbuster movies. And because of that, people will continue to pay high prices for rare graded games. That's the author's tag on the end. I think it's interesting that obviously her boss is involved with a lot of this. So Valerie can't talk about her boss being involved allegedly with price manipulation and being involved with the grading house. But like, it's an inconvenient truth that exists there.
Sure.
And it's one of those things that. What's that?
I just heard a pop. Was that Zoom or?
You heard a pop?
Yeah.
I didn't hear a pop again.
Oh, okay. Well,
on your side. Fine. That's the bubble bursting potentially. So yeah, so this is what we want to discuss. You're always going to have now people butting heads when it comes to this, but to say something is just born out of envy and jealousy is kind of weak. And to say that there's never been a game market before this stuff has been happening is just, I mean, it's either it's naivety, it's ignorance, and or lying. And I wish this author point out that that was just factually incorrect. That's objectively false to say that. There's always been valuable games. There's always been people buying and selling video games for
it's not new. I mean, all the way back to Atari stuff.
Yeah, when people were spending $50 for just a complete box, Centipede game, back then, you hadn't seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else to add?
No, nothing really. I'm glad that we got to cover that and we got to get it out of the system.
Do you see why now? Do you see now why people at patreon.com/see podcast?
We want to speak about that.